Today, I am going to be talking about La Sabaneta Prison. This facility, operated from 1958 to 2013 in Maracaibo, Venezuela, became famous for its extreme violence and appalling conditions that would make you want to die and not live anymore. For those of you who don't know, La Sabaneta Prison, also called the Maracaibo National Prison, was a very violent prison in Maracaibo, Venezuela, that ran from 1958 to 2013. It was extremely overcrowded, with 3,700 inmates squeezed into a place meant for only 700. Let me paint a picture for you guys so it's easier to imagine. This prison was divided into 4 main parts. The first part, called prosumil, was for military officers and police agents. The second part, re-education, was for people with minor crimes, focusing on helping them change. The third part, known as prison, housed regular prisoners with various backgrounds. The fourth part, maximum, was for the most dangerous criminals with the most serious charges. This division was made to meet the different needs and security levels of the prisoners. Now let's get into the history. As I mentioned, La Sabaneta Prison was established in 1958 in Maracaibo, Venezuela. It was designed to house 700 inmates. But that wasn't the case. Although its initial purpose was to provide a controlled and secure environment for convicted criminals. But from its inception, the prison faced significant challenges that reflected broader issues within the Venezuelan prison system. It's not just about this one. The system was rotten from the inside. At the time of La Sabaneta's establishment, the Venezuelan prison system was already struggling with underfunding, poorly trained and corrupt prison staff, and overcrowding. And by 1997, the system held 25,658 inmates across 32 facilities administered by the Ministry of Justice. Of these inmates, only 8,187 had been sentenced by the courts, indicating a severe backlog in the judicial process. The facilities were designed to accommodate far fewer inmates, leading to more than 10,000 prisoners being held in excess of capacity. This overcrowding worsened already dire conditions. Inmates often had to pay guards and each other to obtain basic necessities such as space in a cell, a bed, and food. The quality and quantity of prison food was so poor that only about 30% of the inmates consumed it. Now you can imagine the state there. Guns, knives, and illegal drugs were easily smuggled into most prisons, leading to frequent violence among prisoners. In 1996 to 1997, the Venezuelan human rights organization Pro documented 283 deaths from violence within the prison system, the majority of which were perpetrated by other inmates. Other than that, 59 inmates were killed by authorities, including one by a prison guard under the Ministry of Justice. Despite repeated acknowledgments of the poor state of the prisons and promises to improve funding, the Venezuelan government's efforts remained insufficient. The chronic underfunding prevented significant improvements in most penitentiaries. Other than that, there were no prosecutions of public officials for the corruption and neglect that contributed to the January 1994 riot at La Sabaneta Prison, during which inmates killed 105 fellow prisoners and wounded scores of others. By 2013, La Sabaneta Prison had become severely overcrowded, with 3,700 inmates occupying a facility built for 700. Imagine that. The prison was largely run by the inmates themselves, with gangs controlling much of the facility. This lack of effective control led to frequent riots, violence, and a dire lack of security, with as few as 8 wardens on duty at any given time. Conditions. Now, all this would paint a picture of how the conditions were inside. The overcrowding was so acute that many prisoners were forced to sleep in hammocks strung up in narrow pipe-access passageways between cell corridors. This extreme density exacerbated the already dire living conditions, making survival a daily struggle for many inmates. The living conditions at La Sabaneta were harsh, with a lack of basic amenities, pervasive health issues, and severe hygiene problems. Inmates were dependent on their families or others outside the prison for necessities such as mattresses, bedding, clothing, and even food. The food that was available was so bad that no one could really eat it, and even if they wanted to, it wasn't enough for everyone. This dependency on external support highlighted the prison's inability to provide even the most basic care for its population. The infrastructure of the prison was another major issue. Open sewage canals cut through various parts of the facility, creating a hazardous and unsanitary environment. Imagine the smell there, but that's not all. Webs of electric wires ran haphazardly through prisoners' living quarters, posing a significant fire hazard. The prison was essentially transformed into a crowded shanty town, with makeshift shelters scattered about the grounds, illustrating the complete breakdown of any formal structural organization within the prison. The prison was largely run by the prisoners themselves, with gangs controlling much of the facility. The black market within the prison was thriving, with guns, knives, and illegal drugs being easily smuggled in. This self-governance by inmates led to frequent violence, as power struggles and territorial disputes were common. And here's what's the worst part. During a visit by a Human Rights Watch delegation, not a single guard was seen within the prison. It must feel like a jungle there. Some people have mentioned that it was like thousands of rats were living there. Men carrying weapons fought over buckets of food, and many times prisoners would lay paralyzed by a bullet from a recent shooting. This lack of oversight and control by prison authorities contributed significantly to the lawlessness and violence that plagued La Sabaneta. I mean, you are supposed to take care of this stuff, but that's not all. Here's where it gets even worse. Interestingly, there was a very major contrast between the conditions in the men's and women's sections of La Sabaneta. The women's annex was built in 1989. It was really well maintained, clean, and safe. Instead of being in cells with bars, many women had their own rooms with wooden doors. Inside, there was a big library, a nice visiting area, classrooms, and even a church. It wasn't crowded, and there weren't any reports of violence there, but this highlights a big difference compared to the rest of the prison. And you know what's even more shocking? This prison was completely taken over by the inmates. And it's just not about this prison in particular. Inmates in many Venezuelan prisons are heavily armed with guns and grenades, giving them a lot of power inside the prison walls. These prisons have become like fortified strongholds, operating without government control. Criminal gangs, led by a pran or kingpin, govern these prisons. The kingpin enforces a strict code of conduct that all inmates must follow. This code is applied very harshly, with severe punishments for those who break it, including being shot in various body parts. This strict enforcement keeps the kingpin's authority unchallenged. No one can even bat an eye. And because of the danger from the heavily armed inmates, Venezuelan troops do not enter the prisons. Instead, they patrol the perimeter, watching closely and aiming their rifles at any inmate who tries to escape. The military presence around these prisons highlights the dangerous and unstable situation, with the government avoiding direct confrontation with the armed inmates inside. And yes, when something is governed by criminals, it does lead to chaos, violence, and riots. As you can tell by the details, the prison's atmosphere was characterized by constant fear, brutality, and lawlessness, with gangs exerting significant influence over the facility. This toxic environment led to numerous violent incidents, including 2 particularly devastating riots in 1994 and 2013. The general atmosphere at La Sabaneta was one of perpetual violence. Gangs controlled various aspects of prison life, from the distribution of food and living space to the trafficking of weapons and drugs. The prison authorities didn't have much control, so gangs could do whatever they wanted. This made things scary and unstable for everyone. The 1994 riot and fire at La Sabaneta were among the most horrific events in the prison's history. A big fight broke out because of the gangs, and things got worse until a group of inmates started a fire. When the fire spread, everything went crazy. Inmates, armed with firearms, Molotov cocktails, and knives, attacked those trying to escape the inferno. The prison's security personnel, overwhelmed and underprepared, struggled to regain control, further exacerbating the violence. Over 150 inmates were killed in this incident, making it one of the deadliest prison riots in history. The high number of casualties and injuries highlighted the severe shortcomings in the prison's management and the dire consequences of its neglect. And that's not all. In 2013, another violent riot shook La Sabaneta, showing the persistent issues of gang violence and poor security. This riot resulted in the deaths of 16 inmates, with some victims being dismembered and beheaded. The brutality of the 2013 riot was also shocking, even by the standards of La Sabaneta. It is said that internal conflicts and gang rivalries were the primary causes of the violence. Throughout that year, a total of 69 inmates were killed, illustrating the ongoing cycle of violence and chaos within the prison. These repeated incidents of extreme violence underscored the urgent need for intervention and reform in the Venezuelan prison system. Personal stories from inmates and wardens show the harsh reality of life inside La Sabaneta. Oswaldo Espina, a survivor of the 1994 riot, recounted the terror of the event, describing how inmates armed themselves and fought viciously as the fire raged. The lack of security and the failure of the authorities to control the situation allowed the violence to spiral out of control, leading to tragic and devastating consequences. Another figure within the prison was Mocho Edwin, a powerful inmate known as the Pran at the time of its closure. Edwin was heavily involved in illicit activities, including drug sales and prostitution within the prison. His story shows the complex dynamics of power and control within La Sabaneta, where influential inmates held significant authority. When the prison was set to close, Edwin resisted, refusing to relinquish his position of power. His defiance and the control he had show how hard it is for the authorities to manage such a dangerous environment. Security issues. La Sabaneta Prison suffered from severe security issues due to an insufficient number of wardens and rampant smuggling of weapons, drugs, and even animals into the facility. These problems worsened the already dire conditions within the prison, contributing to its notoriety as one of the most dangerous prisons in the world. The lack of security personnel was a critical issue at La Sabaneta. With as few as 8 wardens on duty at a time to maintain order among the 3,700 inmates, it was nearly impossible for the authorities to effectively control the prison population. This severe understaffing resulted in a guard-to-inmate ratio of approximately 1:462, far below the recommended levels for maintaining security in a correctional facility. The extreme imbalance meant that wardens were overwhelmed and unable to enforce rules or prevent violence effectively. This lack of oversight allowed gangs to gain control over various aspects of prison life, further deteriorating the security situation. Smuggling of contraband was rampant at La Sabaneta. Guns, knives, and illegal drugs were easily brought into the prison, significantly contributing to the high levels of violence among inmates. It is said that authorities seized over 22,000 rounds of ammunition, pistols, and rifles during the search, revealing the extent of the smuggling operations. The raid also uncovered tunnels up to 15 meters deep, where more than 12 kilograms of marijuana and cocaine were hidden. Prison Minister Iris Varela vowed that those responsible for smuggling the illicit items would face severe consequences. But wait for this. During a raid at Sabaneta Prison in Venezuela, authorities discovered a surprising collection of animals among the inmates. The raid followed a violent riot where 16 inmates were killed. Alongside weapons, police found a variety of animals, including an ocelot, caimans, raccoons, macaws, and various farm animals like turkeys, pigs, and cows. There were also several purebred dogs, including pit bulls and Siberian huskies. In response, Venezuela's Minister for Penitentiary Affairs, Iris Varela, ordered the evacuation of the prison to ensure no weapons were left behind. The inmates were to be transferred to other prisons across the country. Inmates managed to sneak in these animals and keep them as pets or for other reasons, showing how easy it was to bring illegal stuff into the prison. The security issues at La Sabaneta, including the insufficient number of wardens and the smuggling of weapons, drugs, and even animals, contributed significantly to the overall atmosphere of violence and chaos that plagued the facility. The authorities' inability to maintain control over the prison population and prevent the influx of contraband was a major factor in the high levels of violence and lawlessness that characterized La Sabaneta. Aftermath. In 2013, following a riot that killed 16 inmates, some of whom were dismembered and beheaded, the Venezuelan government decided to close La Sabaneta Prison. This riot, resulting from an internal war between rival gangs, was exacerbated by weapons smuggling facilitated by corrupt guards. The closure marked the end of years of severe overcrowding, where 3,700 inmates occupied a facility designed for just 700. The decision to close La Sabaneta came as a response to the persistent violence, riots, and security issues that had plagued the prison for decades. The Venezuelan government recognized that the conditions within La Sabaneta were unsustainable and that the facility had become emblematic of the failures of the country's prison system. In the aftermath of the 2013 riot, the government announced plans to reopen La Sabaneta as a museum. The aim was to transform the prison into an educational facility where citizens could learn about the historical mismanagement and human rights abuses that occurred within its walls. And by converting La Sabaneta into a museum, the government hoped to create a space for reflection on the harsh realities of the penal system and to ensure that the atrocities committed there would not be forgotten. However, in August 2023, the Venezuelan Prison Observatory reported that local residents feared the prison had been reopened. This report led to significant concern among the public and human rights organizations about the potential for the facility to be used again as a prison, despite the government's stated plans for a museum. Recent developments. In August 2023, the Venezuelan Prison Observatory reported that local residents feared the crazy Sabaneta prison had been reopened. This led to significant concerns among the public and human rights organizations about the potential for the facility to be used again as a prison, despite the government's stated plans to convert it into a museum. However, recent reports of the prison's potential reopening have reignited fears among local residents about the return of violence and lawlessness to the area. One anonymous family member of an imprisoned individual expressed disappointment with the government's response to the situation, stating, "When will these massacres end? We demand the government's presence in Sabaneta National Prison." The Venezuelan Prison Observatory, which has been closely monitoring the situation, revealed that 80% of jails in Venezuela are controlled by armed inmates, leaving the security forces with minimal influence. This lack of control by authorities has contributed to the high levels of violence and lawlessness that have plagued prisons like Sabaneta. The fear that these conditions could return has left many residents and observers deeply concerned. As Venezuela continues to grapple with high crime rates and a struggling judicial system, the fate of Sabaneta Prison remains uncertain. The public's fear of the prison's reopening underscores the deep-seated issues within the country's penal system and the need for transparency and accountability in any plans for the former prison site. Addressing these concerns is crucial for restoring public trust and ensuring that the prison's dark history is not repeated, paving the way for meaningful reform in Venezuela's prison system. High-profile incidents such as the massacres at Sabaneta Prison in 1994 and La Planta Prison in 1996 have drawn international attention to these conditions, but they represent only a fraction of the ongoing turmoil. The crisis in Venezuela's prisons can be traced back to the mid-1980s. At that point, the Venezuelan Public Ministry warned that the state of the prison system posed a threat to democratic stability. Despite attempts by the government to address these issues, such as deploying the National Guard to maintain order and delegating prison administration to state governments, Human Rights Watch has noted that progress has been slow and largely ineffective. The recent closure of Catia Prison in Caracas was a notable step towards reform, symbolizing a commitment to improving conditions, but much more remains to be done. Adding to the overcrowding issue is the fact that nearly 3/4 of the prison population consists of unsentenced prisoners detained without a conviction. Human Rights Watch attributes this to the inefficiency and backlog within the criminal justice system, as well as the frequent denial of provisional liberty for defendants awaiting trial. Legal proceedings in Venezuela are notoriously slow, often dragging on for years, violating international standards that mandate timely trials. The result of these systemic failures is a prison environment that exacts a heavy toll in human lives. In 1996 alone, official reports documented 207 prisoner deaths and 1,133 injuries due to violence within the facilities. However, significant challenges remain, including the need for more civilian guards, better medical care, and effective legal reforms. Human Rights Watch asserts that the Venezuelan government must prioritize comprehensive reforms to address the severe overcrowding, ensure timely judicial processes, improve living conditions, and eliminate the pervasive violence and abuse within the prison system. Only through sustained and concerted efforts can the dire situation in Venezuela's prisons be ameliorated, ensuring that the rights and dignity of prisoners are upheld. From its severe overcrowding and appalling living conditions to the rampant violence and riots, La Sabaneta's story shows us the urgent need for prison reform and the protection of human rights. If you found this exploration insightful, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content on historical and current events that shape our world. Your support helps us bring more stories to light. What do you think is the most important step towards improving prison systems around the world? And what shocked you the most? For me, it was the fact that no guards would be present inside the prison at times. That must have been so scary for inmates who were bullied by the gangs. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching.